Have you ever looked at your life and wondered why pain has to exist? You try to be good. You try to stay strong. But then one day, life doesn't just test you, it tears everything away. It could be the night you lost someone you loved, the day your dream collapsed, the moment you realized the future you imagined would never come. You stand there, staring at the pieces of your life, and you ask the question that every human sooner or later has whispered to themselves. Why me? Why this? Why now? No answer comes. Just silence. And in that silence, a strange truth begins to appear. What if pain isn't the enemy? What if suffering, the very thing we spend our whole lives trying to escape, is the thing trying to show us who we really are? That's where Viktor Frankl's story begins. Not in success, not in peace, but in unimaginable loss. Before the war, Viktor Frankl was a respected psychiatrist in Vienna. Brilliant, idealistic, deeply curious about what makes life meaningful. He had everything: a family who loved him, a career that gave him purpose, and a quiet faith in the goodness of humanity. But in 1942, that world vanished. The Nazis came. They took his home. They took his freedom. And one by one, they took the people he loved most. Frankl was sent to a concentration camp, a place where human beings were reduced to numbers, where death was routine, and where every sunrise felt like a cruel reminder that you were still alive. In that place, he lost everything that once gave his life meaning: his books, his patience, his family, his future. Gone. All he had left was his mind, and that became his battlefield. Imagine this. You're standing in freezing snow, your body starving, guards shouting, prisoners collapsing beside you. There's no end in sight, no reason to hope. And yet, somewhere inside you, a tiny voice refuses to die. That voice says, there must be a reason for this. There has to be something left that I can still choose. That voice became Viktor Frankl's lifeline, because what he began to notice around him was both terrifying and profound. The ones who gave up, who said life no longer had meaning, would soon wither and die. But those who found even the smallest reason to hold on, a loved one's memory, a dream of a future, a belief that this suffering could still mean something, they endured. He realized something no textbook had ever taught him. Man does not survive by food or air alone. He survives by meaning. Frankl began watching people closely. He noticed that two prisoners could face the exact same horror, and one would crumble while the other stood firm. The difference wasn't strength. It wasn't luck. It was purpose. One man would whisper to himself, "I must survive so I can see my wife again." Another would say, "I want to finish the book I started before the war." That flicker of meaning, however small, became light in total darkness. And Frankl began to write, secretly, on scraps of paper, notes that would one day form his book, Man's Search for Meaning. He called his discovery logotherapy, the idea that our primary drive in life isn't pleasure or power, but meaning. Even when everything else is taken, your freedom, your dignity, your hope, you still have one last freedom: to choose how you will respond. One night, as he marched in silence under the icy sky, his body weak and his spirit almost gone, a single thought struck him. He imagined himself years later, standing before a crowd, teaching others what he had learned in the camps, that even when you can't change your circumstances, you can still change yourself. That vision became his strength. It didn't erase the pain, but it gave it meaning. Because meaning doesn't remove suffering. It transforms it. The same pain that tried to break him became the reason he survived. He would later write, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances." To most people, that's a quote. To Frankl, it was a law of survival. And when you think about your own life, the heartbreak, the failure, the silent nights when no one was there to save you. You start to see it too. Maybe life isn't punishing you. Maybe it's preparing you. Maybe your suffering isn't meaningless at all. Maybe it's your invitation to rise. That night, Viktor Frankl didn't escape the camp. He didn't win his freedom. He won something far greater, understanding. He discovered that pain, when faced with purpose, becomes transformation. And that maybe, the real question isn't, why do we suffer? But rather, what is my suffering trying to teach me? There are prisons built of concrete, and then there are prisons built of thought. Viktor Frankl lived in both. One made of barbed wire, cold nights and empty bowls. The other, a place inside the mind, where despair whispered that life no longer mattered. But one day, in the middle of that hell, he realized something no guard, no wall, no chain could ever destroy: the freedom of his own mind. Imagine this. You're standing in line at dawn, forced to march in freezing wind, your body aching, your stomach empty, and someone screams at you to move faster. You have no control over what happens to you. But in that instant, Frankl discovered something extraordinary. He still had control over what happened within him. He began to understand that the human spirit, though fragile, possesses a kind of sacred independence. You can cage the body, but not the will. You can take a man's possessions, but not his power to decide what his pain means. That realization was his rebellion, his quiet revolution. We often think freedom means escape, to get away from whatever hurts us. But Frankl saw that real freedom begins when escape is no longer possible. He once said, "Between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." That space, that single moment between what happens to you and how you react, is where your entire life can change. For most of us, that space is invisible. Someone insults us, we explode, we fail, we despair, we suffer, we collapse. We forget that we can choose. But Frankl didn't forget. He learned to live inside that space, to expand it, protect it, nurture it. Because in that space, even in a concentration camp, he found freedom. He noticed that some prisoners, though starved and beaten, still shared their bread with others. They still whispered words of hope. They still comforted those about to die. They had nothing. But in that nothingness, they discovered the ultimate power: to choose love over hate, faith over despair, meaning over emptiness. They were free, even behind barbed wire. Frankl called this the last of the human freedoms, the ability to choose one's attitude, to find purpose even in suffering. And when you think about it, that's the one freedom life can never take from you. You can lose your job. You can lose your home. You can lose your health, your security, your certainty. But as long as you have the power to choose your response, you remain unconquered. That's the secret most people never learn. Because we spend our lives chasing outer freedom, money, status, control, and ignore the inner freedom that makes us truly alive. Outer freedom can be stolen. Inner freedom is untouchable. Frankl's discovery changed how he saw everything. Even the guards who humiliated him, even the endless nights of cold and hunger. He realized they could control his body but not his meaning. One day, while being beaten, he suddenly thought, "They can do this to me, but I decide who I am." It was a moment of total clarity. He understood that suffering, though forced upon him, didn't have the final word. He did. That choice, that decision to stay human in an inhuman place, was his ultimate act of freedom. And when you look at your own life, you might see the same truth hiding in your pain. No, you're not in a camp, but maybe you're trapped in a toxic job, a broken relationship, an addiction, a situation that feels hopeless. Maybe you can't leave it, not yet. But you can still choose how you face it. You can choose what it means. And in that choice, you begin to break free. Because freedom isn't about avoiding pain. It's about discovering who you become through it. Frankl didn't survive because he escaped suffering. He survived because he mastered his response to it. That's what he wanted the world to understand. You don't have to wait for life to be perfect to be free. Freedom is already inside you, waiting for you to claim it. There's a quiet power in that realization, because it means no matter what's taken from you, you are still the author of your response. You are still the meaning maker of your life. That's what Viktor Frankl found in the darkest place on earth. And that's what you can find in the darkest moments of your own. He would later write, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." And maybe that's the heart of it all. Life doesn't always give us control over what happens, but it always gives us the power to decide what it will mean. That is the freedom no one can ever take away. Pain. It's the one thing every human shares, yet it's also the one thing most of us run from. We numb it, we distract ourselves, we tell ourselves we'll be happy when it's over. But Viktor Frankl discovered something that changed everything. The purpose of life is not to avoid suffering, it's to transform it. Inside the camp, pain was constant. Cold mornings, hunger, humiliation, endless labor. But Frankl began to notice something strange. Pain, when given meaning, could change shape. It stopped being an enemy and started becoming a teacher. He saw men break down from hopelessness and others rise up through the same torment, simply because they believed their suffering meant something. And that's when he realized the difference between despair and resilience is not the amount of pain you feel, it's the meaning you attach to it. He once wrote, "Suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning." Think about that. The pain doesn't disappear, it transforms. A mother who loses her child and decides to help others heal. A soldier who returns from war and dedicates his life to peace. A person who endures depression and then guides others through the darkness. These people didn't escape suffering, they gave it purpose. And in doing so, they became something unbreakable. That was Frankl's revelation. Pain doesn't destroy meaning, it creates it. Because when everything comfortable is gone, you're forced to find out what really matters. Inside the camp, he saw that those who survived were not necessarily stronger or smarter. They were anchored to a reason, a why. He said, "Those who have a why to live can bear almost any how." That why, that sacred reason, is the thread that connects suffering to purpose, and every person has to find their own. For Frankl, his why became crystal clear. He wanted to live to finish his book. He wanted to share what he had discovered, that even in horror, the soul can remain free. So when pain came, he didn't ask, "Why is this happening to me?" He asked, "What is life demanding from me right now?" That single question flipped everything. It turned him from a victim of fate into a participant in meaning. Maybe you faced something you thought you couldn't survive. A heartbreak that shattered you, a failure that left you lost, a trauma that stole your sense of self. But here's the truth Frankl discovered. Your pain doesn't have to be the end of your story. It can become the beginning of your purpose. The wound you carry may become the very doorway through which others find healing. Your suffering, when faced with courage, can become your contribution to the world. Frankl called this the tragic optimism, the ability to remain hopeful and find meaning despite the unavoidable tragedies of human life. He didn't mean pretending everything is fine. He meant facing reality, all the pain, loss, and cruelty, and still saying, "I choose to find meaning anyway." That's what makes us human. That's what keeps us from turning bitter or broken. Tragic optimism is not naive. It's sacred defiance. It's looking into the darkness and whispering, "You will not have the final word." And it's not just philosophy. It's psychology, proven again and again. People who find purpose in suffering recover faster, love deeper, and live longer. They stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and start asking, "What can I do with what has happened?" That question is where transformation begins. Frankl once described a moment that defined his philosophy. He was forced to dig trenches in frozen ground, his body shaking from exhaustion. The guard screamed, the snow bit into his hands, and he thought he couldn't go on. Then he imagined his wife, her face, her smile, her love. He realized he didn't even know if she was alive. But in that moment, it didn't matter. Her image gave him meaning. Her memory became his strength. And suddenly, the cold wasn't just suffering. It was endurance, an act of love. He was living not for survival, but for something beyond survival. That's the power of transforming pain into purpose. It doesn't erase the suffering, it transcends it. When your pain becomes your purpose, your suffering becomes your story, and your story becomes someone else's survival guide. That's what Frankl taught the world. That meaning is not found in comfort, but in how you face the uncomfortable. That the soul grows not through ease, but through endurance. That sometimes the wound is the way. He didn't want people to glorify suffering. He wanted them to redeem it. He wanted us to see that the question is not, how can I avoid pain? But, what can I create because of it? Because once you find meaning in your suffering, you no longer fear it. You stand inside the storm and say, this too will serve something greater. In the end, Viktor Frankl didn't just survive the camps. He walked out carrying a message that would echo for generations. Your pain is not a punishment. It's a passage. And when you give it purpose, you turn your suffering into strength, your darkness into light, your survival into meaning. There's a moment after survival, a quiet, haunting silence. When the screams fade, the chaos ends, and you're left asking, now what? Many people never escape that silence. They survive, but they never truly live again. But Viktor Frankl did something extraordinary. He stepped out of hell, and instead of running from the past, he turned back and built meaning from its ashes. When the war ended and the camps were liberated, Frankl walked free. But freedom felt empty. His family was gone, his home destroyed, everything he had loved, erased. He stood in the ruins of his old life and faced a truth most of us spend years avoiding. There's no going back. You can't rebuild what was lost, but you can build something new from what remains. And that's where true meaning begins. He returned to Vienna with nothing but the clothes on his back and the vision that had kept him alive. The belief that even the deepest suffering can be transformed into something sacred. He sat down and began to write. Every page of man's search for meaning was born from the ashes of his pain. It wasn't just a book. It was a mirror, showing humanity its own capacity to find light in the darkest hour. He didn't preach hope. He embodied it. He spoke to the broken, the grieving, the hopeless, and told them, you cannot always control what happens to you, but you can always choose how you respond. That was his gospel, choice. Even in hell, we are never fully powerless. Because between stimulus and response there lies one sacred space, the space where freedom lives. Frankl called this the ultimate human freedom, the ability to choose one's attitude in any given circumstance. That's what no one could take from him. Not the guards, not the pain, not the camps. He realized that while the body can be imprisoned, the spirit cannot, unless you let it. And that revelation became his life's mission, to teach others how to find that freedom for themselves. He founded logotherapy, a new school of psychology based on one profound idea. Humans are not driven by pleasure or power, but by meaning. That's what separates us from despair. That's what keeps the soul alive when everything else is stripped away. And through his work, Frankl helped thousands rediscover that truth, that suffering without meaning destroys you, but suffering with meaning transforms you. He said, life is never made unbearable by circumstances, but only by lack of meaning and purpose. Let that sink in. It's not the pain that breaks us. It's the emptiness. It's not tragedy itself. It's believing that tragedy has no purpose. But if you can find a reason, even a small one, you can endure almost anything. That's how Frankl lived. That's how he helped others rise again. He taught that meaning isn't something you find, it's something you create. In love, in work, in courage, in serving others. He believed life constantly asks us one question: what will you do with what you've been given? And our answer, our attitude, our choices, our response, that's what defines who we are. He didn't tell people to chase happiness. He warned that happiness, when pursued, always runs away. But when you dedicate yourself to meaning, happiness quietly follows behind. He said, "Happiness cannot be pursued, it must ensue." And that single line changed how generations understood purpose. Because when you stop chasing pleasure and start seeking meaning, you stop running from life. You start living it. Frankl's life became proof of his philosophy. He married again. He taught, lectured, healed. He became a symbol of resilience, not because he avoided pain, but because he redeemed it. He took the nightmare and turned it into a message that saved lives. His story wasn't about surviving a concentration camp. It was about surviving being human. And maybe that's the message you need to hear right now. Because the truth is, everyone will face their own version of the camp. It may not have walls or guards, but it will test your spirit. There will be nights when meaning feels far away, when life seems cruel, unfair, senseless. But Frankl's life whispers back through time. You can still choose. You can still create meaning. You can still rise. So when you face the darkness, don't ask, why me? Ask, what now? Because within that question lies freedom. Within that choice lies purpose. And in that purpose lies peace. Viktor Frankl once wrote, "What is to give light must endure burning." He endured the burning, and in doing so, he became the light. And now his message burns within us all, that no suffering is wasted if it awakens your soul, no pain meaningless if it leads you to your purpose. You are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to become. Pause. So maybe life will test you again. Maybe pain will return. But this time, remember what Viktor Frankl discovered. You can survive anything if you find meaning in it. And that meaning will set you free.